What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. For my pardon, this I see. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. For my cleansing, this my plea. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. This is all my hope and peace. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. This is all my righteousness.
And I love you.
Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Nothing but the blood of Jesus.
That's why we pray.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Free of Brian Free and Assurance. We have a new album out, and it's featured this week on Enlighten Album Spotlight. It's called Meet Me at the Cross. I hope you'll be here when we'll be hosting the show, playing all the songs and telling you all about the project. Tonight at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific, only on Enlighten.
Shall we gather at the river where bright angel feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful, beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Soon we'll reach the shining river. Soon our pilgrimage will see. Soon our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful, beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. margin of the river, washing up its silver spray. We will walk and worship ever all the happy golden day. And yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful, beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Oh yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful, beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. That flows by the throne of God. That flows by the throne of God.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Why don't you swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride? Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Why don't you swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride? Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Well, swing, 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 well, well, Ezekiel went down in the middle of the field, saw an angel working on a chariot wheel. Wasn't so particular about the chariot wheel, he just wanted to see how a chariot feels. Why don't you swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride? Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Well, swing, 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 swing. Oh, look at yonder. Well, Ezekiel went down and he got on board. Chariot went on bumping on down the road. He was so particular about the bumping on the road. He just wanted to lay down his heavy load. Why don't you swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride? Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Well, I've got a father in the promised land. I won't stop until I shake his hand. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side. Rock me, Lord, calm and easy. I've got a home on the other side.
It's Sunday Inspiration on Enlightened Sirius XM.
I was raised in a little place called Walnut Grove, Kentucky, population 36. Quite a bit different than Minneapolis, Minnesota. But my mom and daddy used to take us to an old-fashioned country church. Just a little old white frame church that sat out on the hill. Didn't even have any seats on the platform at all. No choir. Had this old broke-down piano that sat over in the corner. When they started church, all the saints come and stood on the platform, and they sang during the song service. And that old piano hadn't been tuned in about 10 or 15 years, and it sounded bad. My first cousin, her name was Rowena. She played that piano, and she played it bad. We used to pray she wouldn't show up for church till after song service would be over. But this is one of my favorite songs that they used to.
They can't start till I do. All right, good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody out on this chilly morning. Get myself all organized here. Try to. Nice to see everybody out today. Let's go ahead and go to prayer before we start our class, and I'll start just anywhere. Okay, Steve. Ruby?
Remember Aaron Cody Moore? I seen him in the hospital this weekend. I had an outing with my legal guardian, Dawn, and her mother. And I got to talk to Aaron for the first time in years. He was on the phone, and I got to see when I talked with him, he was there in the hospital. And Dawn and Nancy, they said they should have been there with him. Then they said no, they wouldn't let us in. And he just broke out in tears. He was crying. Poor fella, he's 30 years old. He got a kidney donor 2 years back. The thing that was, I heard and found out when they put it in back. And boy, he's really been having a tough time of it. And he let us see around in the room that he was in. I thought that was an awful looking place, had them old tan walls and stuff, like you real old hospitals had. And I was wondering where in the world he was at in the he just broke out crying. Just remembering him in prayer. He's been having a real hard time of it.
Okay, Bruce. Anybody else? Ronnie?
Continue to remember me and my family. Remember my mother and 2 brothers. Continue to remember Taylor.
All right.
Remember Amanda this week, she's in North Carolina.
Mark, I'd like to remember Corey this morning. She gets healed up a little more. And remember our kids, Allison traveling in this week, Brett, Wade. Remember my mom and dad.
All right.
There's this lady named Donna that got hit by a car, that she was putting her kid on the bus, and she was killed in the accident. Last night, it was real heavy on my mind, so we prayed for that family. From love.
I remember Alan Sargent, he's hard on that night. He had a heart attack, actually. After he had the surgery on his mouth, he had the surgery, he had the heart attack at home. So he's up in Morgantown, so he's got a long road ahead of him, I'm sure.
I ask you guys to remember us in your prayers. We're supposed to travel tomorrow to go down to Trish's mom's in Florida for the holiday, but my little guy's sick, has a fever of over 100 for the last couple of days, and I'm afraid we may not be making that trip. So just remember that and him, if you would. All right, anyone else with a spoken prayer?
Or I still remember all the loss we did in my family, and like you said, a lot of the sick stuff is still in the family. Randall, he's pretty sick yesterday afternoon, and seeing the love of God through those actions.
Yeah.
That it will bless them, not only in the spiritual realm, but in the physical realm also.
All right. Anybody else?
Still remember Bonnie and Georgia Freeman and her sister. And remember our nation and our missionaries and Russia and Ukraine as law enforcement.
All right, I'm sure everyone has unspoken prayer requests. Let's all stand if you would, please. Let's try to remember each other's prayers. Most of all, let's approach God with a thankful heart. We have a lot to be thankful for. If nothing else, just the fact that we're able to be here this morning together. So let's give thanks this morning. John, you mind leading today?
Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father, thank you this morning, Lord, for your blessings that you've given us already. Lord, we thank you for this privilege you've allowed and told us to come into your house, Lord, to lift up the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, we ask as always that you forgive us for our sins, forgive us for as you, Lord, and one another so often. Father, we pray that you would forgive those sins and help us draw closer to you every day. Father, we just ask that you would every prayer request we have up this morning. Bless each and every one of us. Bless all in this time of holiday season. Let everybody put in peace and comfort this morning. Lord, we ask that you would keep your hand on nothing. We try to help us. Bless us as we present your holy word today. Father, we pray that you can according to your holy will. We help in our discussion, not just the ultimate, but the other. Jesus' holy name.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen. All right, before we start reading, I'll also ask if anybody's got a verse or passage you'd like to share with us. All right, Bruce.
I got a few of them here. First I'm going to read here is out of the book of Isaiah.
Okay.
And it's chapter 66, and I'm going to start here at verse 1. Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye built unto me, and where is the place of my rest? For all these things hath mine hand made, and all those things have been, saith the Lord. But to this man will I look, even to him that is poor, and of contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. Now the second reading is from Matthew. All right. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh from thee. All right, now the third reading is out of the book of Matthew 2. It's all right. Let's see. And all right now, whosoever I lost my place. Just hold on. All right, here I found it. Whosoever shall swear of the altar is nothing, but whosoever swear by the gift is up on the altar is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for where is the greater the gift or the altar that sanctifieth gifts? Whoso And he that shall swear by heaven, swear by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon. May God add a blessing to the reading of his holy word.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get into our lesson this morning. The title of it is Riding Out the Storm. And I apologize, you guys get me 2 weeks in a row. Brother Tim is out hunting this morning, or this week anyway, so he asked me to cover for him today. We're still in the book of Acts. This morning we're going to be in chapter 27. And we're going to be talking about storms for just a little bit. You know, for as long as I can remember, and I know you guys already think I'm a little weird, I've loved storms. I love thunderstorms. Don't like them? I don't know why. I've just always liked thunderstorms. You know, and you can always tell when a good one's coming in, can't you? You can feel the air changes. You can smell it. There's just the anticipation of it. Builds up until eventually, you know, you start seeing that first flash of lightning and then the thunder right behind it. I remember several that I've listened to and enjoyed where, you know, you can actually feel the house shaking when the thunder's really rolling. It's kind of cool, I think. A lot of people don't like that. But anyway, I've always just enjoyed thunderstorms. And when I used to work for the 911 center years and years ago, one of my duties was to take care of the tower sites where the radio transmitters are, the repeaters are. And thunderstorms would frequently knock out the power, trip breakers in the building, blow fuses in equipment, and it was my job to go up and kind of be the first line of troubleshooting before somebody else had to get called out. And you'd have to go up to these mountaintops to get everything back up, and you know, Spruce Mountain, Tams, Bolt, and then we had another one out at Bragg. I really didn't mind doing it. It was kind of a nice experience being on. If you like thunderstorms at all, enjoy one at the top of a mountain where you can watch all the little bolts of lightning dancing around all over the place. That's kind of a unique experience, especially 3 o'clock in the morning, pouring the rain, lightning, thunder. Those were the good old days. But anyway, I understand that me liking thunderstorms is a tad off, but we all go through storms. We've all experienced thunderstorms like that, right? But weather-related events like that aren't the only storms we go through, are they? We go through what we call, and I don't know how this phrase got phrased, the storms of life. Every single one of us has gone through storms of life, right? Do we like, and I'll be honest with you, that's the one storm that I don't like, okay? I like thunderstorms, I like snowstorms. Storms of life, I don't like, and I don't think any of us do. None of us enjoy going through the storms of life. So when we talk about the storms of life, and I'd like to hear from several people if you would, because everybody's experience is different. Everybody's storm is different, right? So what are we talking about? What do we consider the storms of life?
Tragic events in your life.
Okay. What's that? Okay.
Trials and temptations.
Temptations, yep.
Addiction.
Absolutely. So some of the things that I thought of when I wrote down some of the things that I would consider storms of life, and you guys have already mentioned several of these: health issues, death in the family or loved one, somebody close to you. Financial problems can cause real storms in your life. Relationship struggles, accidents. You know, these are some of the big things we think about as being storms of life, and you could probably think of others that I haven't read. But there's also countless little storms that we go through all the time too, right? Some of the things I thought of, and Bruce already mentioned one of them, temptations. I call these kind of smaller things that we kind of deal with every day. Temptations that we go through, decisions we have to make, watching politics on television. You know, all these things are kind of storms that we have to go through all the time. And none of us is immune to storms, right? You know, knowing that we're not immune from storms, why do we always act so surprised when we find ourselves dead in the middle of one? like, where did that come from? I never saw this coming. Don't we? I mean, we sort of have that reaction a lot. And there's a lot of storms, you know, other than those big ones that sort of just happen to us. And we even do this with some of the other, some of those too. Do those storms always just hit us? I mean, do they just like, boom, we're right in the middle of a storm? We never saw it coming? How many of you find that many of the storms you find yourself in, you walked right into it? Had all kinds of opportunities to go a different direction, didn't we? But chose to go for the storm. You know, those are the ones that we get to from our bad decisions, our bad choices, bad reactions to things. There's just all kinds of stuff. And what makes it worse is going through storms like this, and we're going to, is they could have been avoided. At any point, they could have been avoided. Most of the storms, now I'm not talking about health issues we can't help. Death, that's going to happen. We can't help that. But a lot of the storms that we find ourselves in, we did it. We caused it. We either jumped into it or just kind of sidled up to it, whatever, but we put ourselves there. Now, in our lesson this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about a storm, and we're going to be obviously reading about the Apostle Paul, and he's already in the middle of one storm and then lands square in the middle of another one. So we're going to talk about this. We'll talk about storms a little bit. We'll do this like we normally do. I'll read the first verse and you guys read after me, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about the verses. This is in Acts chapter 27. Our reading this morning starts in verse 13. It says, "And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete."
Not long after, there was an tempestuous storm called Euroclydon.
"And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive.
And running under a certain island which is called Claude, we had comfort to come by the boat.
Which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven.
And we, being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship.
And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship.
And when neither sun nor stars many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was being taken away.
But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss.
And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, when there shall be no less of any man's life among you, but of the ship.
For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve.
Say, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all things to sail with thee.
Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me.
Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island.
Amen. All right, so from what we see here, we see a description of Paul in the middle of a storm here. So some of the background about what led up to where we are today, him and on the ship and so forth. So Paul, as you can tell by what we just read, he's on a ship. It's most likely a cargo ship that he's placed on. And it's partially being used, obviously, to transport stuff. We don't know what the stuff is, but stuff that's on the ship. And a handful of prisoners that this crew on the ship had been charged with getting Paul transported to Rome. He's supposed to be going to Rome. And he's supposed to stand before Caesar. Now, we don't really read about it in this part of the passage that we have this morning, but one of the worst things that these people on the ship could do, these men that are in charge of watching after these prisoners, is let one of them go. That's huge. If they let something happen to the prisoners, that they escape, that they get away, they're in a worse storm than they're in with this boat. So the one thing we have to keep in mind as we read this, and this was covered in some of the verses prior to the lesson this morning, Paul's journey to Rome wasn't just dictated by man, was it? Anybody go back and read any of the history of this? Who else's plan is it for Paul to be in Rome? God's plan. This was God's plan. Paul is to get to Rome. Paul, it is God's desire, God's purpose for Paul to stand before Caesar in Rome. From everything that I've read in the Bible, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's God's plan, it's going to happen. Now, it's going to happen either somebody volunteered to do it, somebody was kicking and screaming, whatever the case, it's going to happen. If it's God's plan, it will come about, right? So that we need to think about that the whole time that we're looking at this particular lesson, because this is God's plan. All the stuff that is happening here is fulfilling God's plan for Paul to get to Rome. Now, probably, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is probably Paul's last trip that he's getting ready to make here, but he's on his way to Rome in this ship. Some of the things we have to keep in mind about the boat, it being a cargo ship, it's big, it's slow, it doesn't steer real quick, respond real quick. It's made for longevity and getting there, as opposed to, moving around real fast and avoiding stuff and all this. So they're in this big boat, and the time of the year that they're making this trip is almost wintertime. Paul knew that for them to be at sea in the winter was not a good idea. And he tried to warn them before they left, look, we need to just winter here, and they were somewhere right around Crete. We need to stay here for the winter. And they're like, nope, we're not risking anybody getting away. We're not risking this. Looks like the weather's kind of turning. Let's go. We're going to risk it. So they take off. In the wintertime, in the sea, and it's hard for us to think this because every image I ever have of the Mediterranean area, it's always sunny and sandy and it's bright and pretty and all this stuff, Apparently, in the winter months, the sea gets pretty rough. The winds are up, the waves are up. You don't want to be out on the water. So anyway, Paul had already told them, look, it's going to be best we ride out the winter months. And let's not risk the ship. Let's not risk the men. Let's just wait a little bit. And of course, Paul, he's a prisoner. Who's going to listen to a prisoner on the ship? Who's he to tell us what to do? He's not a sailor. He's a prisoner on the boat that we're taking him to Rome. So nobody listened to him. All right. So where we start out in verse 13 here, it talks about there's a south wind blowing softly. Okay. They think, this is our window. We're going to make this trip. So those in charge of the boat and this passage, we're going to go. They take off. They are very confident that they're going to have a smooth trip, and they took off, and then the wind's blowing nice, and they sailed close to Crete and below Crete, and they're well on their way. But like most storms, things didn't stay smooth for very long, did they? Next thing they know, a strong wind comes up, and there's actually and I heard some of you, I was wondering how everybody was going to pronounce the name of that wind. Wind must be pretty tough if it gets its own name, right? So I'm not going to pronounce it, but y'all, it starts Euro, okay?
Did you know there's a song years ago called The Wayward Wind?
Okay.
Well, I haven't heard that one in many, many years.
But so they're going, and this strong wind catches them. I'll say it catches them off guard, but it wasn't, was it? They had warning. Paul told them we shouldn't sail. And they did it anyway. So this storm comes up and supposedly catches them off guard, catches them by surprise. Isn't that the same way that storms come up for us? Just think of those storms of life that we just talked about. We think everything is going along just fine. And then the next minute, you turn around and you're in the middle of a turmoil of some sort. Why do you think that is? Why don't we see it coming?
I think we think we're free of being in that situation.
We kind of let our guard down, don't we? You know, that's a dangerous thing too, as these folks show by not listening to Paul. Now, you know, obviously they may or may not know much about Paul. You know, maybe all they know is he's just a prisoner and he's on his way to Rome. Maybe some of them have heard him preaching and teaching. I sort of think that probably some of them have, because Paul was never bashful to share the gospel with anybody, was he? So I'm kind of thinking, you know, he preached in prisons, he's preached everywhere else, he stood before a king. Our lesson last week, he stood before a king and was basically, you know, sharing the gospel. This is who I was, this is what God did for me, this is what I am now. So I would assume that that's kind of Paul's habit. He's not bashful to preach, to share Jesus Christ with everybody he comes in contact with. So here we see where he has given them warning, but they don't listen. You know, even there are times when we find ourselves in the middle of a storm. We say, well, I really didn't have any warning. I used to work with this person a long time ago. And the famous words from this person were always, nobody ever told me that. Nobody showed me that. It was constantly, well into 2 years of employment. Nobody ever told me that. Nobody showed me that. I'm sure y'all have all worked with the same person or person like that at some time or another. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. You know, yes, we don't necessarily get some warnings, you know, things that come up, a death that just happens out of the blue. We don't get much warning. But we know there's going to be death in our families, don't we? We know we'll go through death, we'll experience death. If not our own, then those around us. We know that, right? So there is still some warning. We shouldn't be totally shocked by things happen. You know, that's part of life. We're going to go through storms. And some of the storms that we put ourselves into the most, aren't we warned about those? There are consequences for everything that we do, right? Everything we say, everything we do. Now, hopefully the consequences are great, but sometimes they're not. If we make a less than favorable decision that put us in this place, or when we start letting our guard down, which is kind of what happened with these people, they've let their guard down. Look at that, clear skies. We don't care if it's winter, we're sailing. And they took off. They certainly knew there was a possibility that they were going to find themselves in a bad place, kind of like what happens in life with those storms. You know, sometimes we miss the signs, sometimes we ignore the signs, and then all of a sudden we find that the storm is right on top of us, which is what's happened with Paul and company here on this ship. All right? So I'm going to read the next verse, verse 15. I just kind of summed up those first two, though. It says, and when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. Now, this is not like, you know, you're out with your wife and you're just scared to take the wheel anymore, so you let her drive. That's never going to happen, right? No, I'm joking. So when they says they let her drive, basically what they did, they quickly realized that in this storm, in the height of this storm, they were out of control. They were powerless to do anything about it. So instead of trying to fight the storm, which is usually our first tendency, right? I can take care of this. I can fix this problem. I got this under control. Gary doesn't fight storms?
You don't, you're out in the ocean.
No, I'm not, well.
You don't fight it.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of talking about our personal storms now, though. We try to fix all those. Yeah, we try to fix those. But instead of fighting it, so what they did was, let's cut her loose, let her drift. We'll just let the wind push where it's going to push. Instead of trying, because this is a big lumbering ship, they don't have a lot of control, they can't maneuver. They figured they're better off if they just let her drift and float around. They will let her drive. So it's going to go where it's going to go. So that's what they're doing. Now the storm is making all the decisions for you, right? Can't do anything about it. Anybody feel like that when you're in the middle of a personal storm? The storm is making all the decisions. You have zero control. You can't do anything about it. You can't fight this. It's a feeling of hopelessness, is it not? I'm never going to survive this. I'm never going to get through this. And again, I'm making comparisons back and forth between this very real storm that they're in and storms of life, okay? But that's the same thing that happens with us. We get out and we're in the middle of that storm and it's just beating on us, beating on us, beating on us, whatever the crisis is or whatever the issue is we're going through, and we just don't feel like there's much control. We have no hope of surviving this. Anybody ever been in the middle of something so bad you thought it was never going to end? I'd say most everybody has. I'd see Carol's post that she put on.
Last year.
I get it. Yep. All right, so I'm going to take the next several verses together. I'm going to read them, 16 through 20. This all kind of follows a pattern here that they're doing, and I'll read through these. In verse 16, it says, "And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat." So they're in trouble, they're drifting, they got to do something. It says, "Which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, straight sail, and so were driven. And were being exceedingly tossed with a tempest. The next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away." They are in a bad way here. This ship is being tossed about. They have no control. These verses all describe all the things that they're trying to do to help the ship at least stay afloat. And don't we do that a lot too? When we're in the middle of a storm or some kind of tempest, I can take care of this. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do this, and that's going to make it better. I'm going to do this, that's going to make it better. And all of these things, and you know what the bad part is we're making decisions while we're in the middle of a storm, and they're very rarely good decisions, right? You either find yourself worse, or you're just floundering around. Everything you're doing is to no avail. So it talks about all the different things they're trying to do, desperately trying to get control of the ship back in the middle of the storm. It talks about this tempest. So this is going on for days. They're getting tossed about for days. I can imagine the morale, the hopelessness, and all this stuff. Everybody's probably just ready to quit. But it talks about they undergird the ship. Now, back in those days, and this is something that I didn't know about until I was studying for this lesson, one of the things they used to do for these ships, especially if it was going to be rough seas, they would either rope or chain around the whole ship to stop it from busting apart and stop it from leaking. They would put pressure on it to hold everything tight together so that the ship would, they got rid of all that. They got rid of the chains and the ropes. They started stripping the ship of equipment that they didn't think they were going to need. And eventually they're throwing cargo off the ship. They're trying to lighten the ship so that it will stay afloat in this tempest that's blowing all around them. Anything they can do to lighten the ship and keep afloat. So many days they are floating around. They're in the middle of this storm. They're tossing stuff overboard. Now, some of them at one time we find out, they want to take a little skiff out off the boat. They want to cruise. They want to leave this. And that's not part of our lesson this morning about staying on the boat. It's better to stay with the boat, which is what they ended up doing. But they drift with this storm, and everything around them is dark. So think about this. Day and night, they can't see the stars at night. They can't see the sun in the day. It's dark. It's bleak. It's blowing. The waves are tossing them around. That's a pretty tough storm, is it not? But don't we feel like the same thing when we're going through our storms as well? Now, I know some people go through worse stuff than others, but sometimes you just think, this is never going to stop. It's got to be horrible. This has to be one of the most desperate times of their lives, fighting against a storm they can't control, right? It talks about there in verse 20, it says, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. They're literally at their rope's end. We can't do anything else here. And again, I know I've said this several times, isn't this a feeling that probably the majority of us can sort of relate to? I'm in this storm, I've lost all hope. I'm done, I can't do anything else. Whatever your storm is, was, has been, maybe you're going through one now. Storms are terrible regardless. We don't want to be in them. Anybody have any comments before we go on? All right, verses 21 and 22. It says, "But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete, and have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship." Now, Paul did something apparently that was totally unlike him during this, up to this time of the storm. From the time he had told them, let's don't go, until now, he kept silent. It said, he had kept his abstinence. He had stopped from speaking with these people. Okay, he abstained from talking, which is very unlike Paul, because we see that Paul, again, he's never at a loss for words. He's always got something to say. Usually, it's about Jesus. That's what he's wanting to talk about. But he finally speaks up. Now, you notice what he does, because who in the middle of a storm likes for somebody that's around you? I told you. I told you should have done this. I told you should have done that. What's the first thing you want to do? Punch him square in the face, right? Don't say that to me. But Paul, very respectfully, goes up to the guys driving the boat, assuming anybody's actually driving right now, and says, you should have listened to me. We should have stayed in Crete and wintered there and then made this trip after the winter months were done and we could be finished with this. But that's not what happened. So he told them that, you should have listened to me when I suggested it. But now he gives them this message that it's like, what? Because he tells them, hey, be of good cheer. That's something else that would probably cause you to want to punch somebody right in the face if in the middle of your storm somebody looked at you and said, you shouldn't worry about that. We're probably going to worry. So anyway, Paul tells them, no one on board, you need to all be of good cheer. No one on this ship is going to die. The ship ain't going to make it, but we are. That's what he's telling them. The ship is the only thing that's going to be destroyed on this trip. Not one single person is going to die. Paul knew something that they didn't know. Right? Now it talks about the faith of Paul. Paul knew that it wasn't God's plan for them to perish on this trip. Paul knew that God had sent him, you will go to Caesar in Rome. Paul knew that. Paul knew that if God purposed something, that was what was going to happen. So now that's not it wasn't just Paul's faith, but I think that's the foundation for Paul having this confidence that we're going to be okay. And I'll read the next 4 verses together, 23, 24, 25. But he tells them, he says, nobody's going to die except for the ship. And then in verse 23, 24, and 25, he says, "For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me." So, Paul's confidence was bolstered by the fact that, everything we read, Paul had total confidence in God. We don't ever see from the time of Paul's conversion, and probably even before, Paul had no doubts about what God said, God's word. He didn't question God. We never see a time in Paul's life where he questioned God. So he's got a huge amount of confidence in God, period. God's with me. I think Paul was, whatever happens is going to be okay. God's with me. But during the night prior to this, an angel had physically appeared before Paul and spoke to him and told him, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. The very God that he served and whose God that he is. Paul was very confident in where he stood with the Lord, and he was very confident in the message that his angel was giving him concerning what was going to happen. And I believe as soon as the angel said it, Paul never questioned that either, even in the middle of the storm. So, this is something that's really tough for us. When we are in the middle of a storm of whatever sort and whatever making it is, we have a hard time being confident that it is going to be okay. And really, no matter how the storm turns out, it's still going to be okay, right? Because God is with us. If we serve God, no matter how the storm turns out, it's still okay, is it not? That's something that's tough, because a lot of people think, we're Christians. I'm never going to go through anything. Those people, they believe in that Jesus guy. Man, they never have any problems. So they get really shocked when they see you in the middle of a problem, don't they? And people kind of look at that. Well, he's got the same kind of problems that I do. What's so special about that? The difference is he is with us always. It doesn't matter. However the storm turns. You know what? If I survive the storm and I come out on the other side of it and everything is great, God was with me. But if God decides to take me in the middle of a storm, maybe it's a bad sickness or whatever, or one of my loved ones, or whatever the case is, you know what? God is in the middle of that too. God is still there. And it's hard for us to accept that. Sometimes bad things happen, right? But we can have the same kind of assurance and the same kind of confidence that Paul had here by just simply sitting back and like, you know what? Lord is with me. However this turns out, it's going to be okay. It's going to be what he wanted. That's the hard part for us. May not be what we wanted, but it's going to be as God had, whatever God's purpose was. So in this way, anyway, Paul reassures them, and how reassured he must have felt. His faith in God gave him the confidence he needed to ride the rest of this storm out, whatever happens. Because he says, the way he ended up that verse, in verse 25, or where he says there, for I believe God. It's just that simple. God believes Paul believes whatever God tells him or leads him to do. And it's just that simple. He doesn't question it. He was not upset about it. But he did have the confidence and he did have the reassurance because the angel told him everyone's going to survive. All right, verse 26. The only bad news about this is, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. The ship is going to go down, okay? But we're going to be okay. We're all going to be on an island out here. And some of them swam, some of them floated on debris from the ship. It turns out, and I'm kind of getting ahead, it's not in our reading this morning, just so you know what happened. They were trying to maneuver the boat through a particular area. They got hung up on rocks. The waves kept bashing and basically just ripped the ship all to pieces. The guards at first were going to let everybody go, the prisoners go down with the ship. But they eventually let everybody off, and so they either swam or they floated on debris and made it back to the shore of this little island. And that's it for our reading this morning and so forth, what happened here. But, we have to realize, and we probably do realize, if some of you have a few years, a couple of birthdays, as Luke likes to say, life is and will throw storms at us, period, right? Some of them are going to be of our own doing. Some of them are going to be things that happen, they just happen. We're in a place where we get caught in this or whatever. Maybe it wasn't our own doing. But as followers of God, as God's children, we can go through any storm that we face with the same confidence that Paul did. It's not easy to do it, especially when you're in the middle of the storm, because everything like this hopeless feeling that these guys had, sometimes we can't turn that off. But we can always turn our focus on God. So whether we pass through the storm or whether we don't make it through the storm, whatever kind of storm it is, that's up to Him, is it not? I mean, we worry about things that are out of our control. When you're in that position, most of the time, all of the time, there's an old saying, left to my own devices, I will self-destruct. And that's typically true when we try to fix things, when we think, I've got this figured out, I know how to make this right, I know how to make that better. We generally self-destruct. We can't control things very well. That's just not our job. But if we're following Him, if we truly keep our focus on God and we're following Him, however the storm turns out, it's going to be okay. And when we realize that, I think that we can have the confidence that we need to go through these storms, just like Paul did. All right, I'm done, everybody. I appreciate your attention.
I think sometimes that God allows these storms to see how we're going to come through. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to lean on Him? Are we going to run and do our own devices? I truly believe that He allows. A lot of people will say to me, well, you know, God just done this to me, God done that to me. But it's not the way it is. He allowed it, I'm sure, but that was the purpose. To see how they were going to withstand. And some of them I know have walked away from God too.
Yeah.
So we need to think about that when these things happen.
There's a lot going on there.
Oh, yeah.
The pieces, like, I've been meditating on it. The pieces of the ship were the pieces of the wreckage. Carried them to where God wanted them to be. You know, in the very last verse, in the reading explains it all. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. You know, can't explain it any better.
Yeah.
You know,
It was all God's plan.
You know, it's like me. Or even if we'll just use this as an example in the scriptures. Something that happened many years ago is still leading people today and encouraging people today. And that was a tragic event. You know, or what seemed should be tragic.
Right.
You know, or like the addiction that I faced, you know, that I overcome. I wouldn't have been able to see it then, but now it's an opportunity to carry others to the same place I am. You know, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate it, everybody.